Have you ever imagined what you would do if, at Christmas, someone revealed a secret that could destroy everything you know about your own family? I never thought my name would be involved in something so dirty until that night. I can still remember the cold I felt when I entered my father's new house, the glances exchanged at the table, the questions that made no sense. Behind the smiles, there was a silence that disturbed me. In a few minutes, everything I thought I knew about my life came crashing down, and I was forced to face truths no one would want to hear at Christmas dinner. But for you to understand how I got to this point, I need to go back to the beginning. I was born on February 2nd, 1999, in Dayton, Ohio, a town surrounded by factories and old houses that never change color, no matter the season. My name is Ethan. I grew up in one of those neighborhoods where almost everyone knows everyone else. But even with so many people around, inside the house I was like an outsider. My mother, Laura, died soon after I was born. She never had the chance to see me grow up, nor to hear my voice. I have no memory of her, only a few old photos tucked away in the back of a drawer, along with some papers I found hidden when I was looking for something else. What I do remember is the house at 124 Miller Street, with its peeling paint and a musty smell that never left the stairs. I grew up hearing that it was the place where I was lucky to have a roof over my head. My father, David, didn't talk much about the past or the mother I lost. He was practical, straightforward, and focused only on maintaining routine. When I was 6, he married Linda, a woman who worked as a nurse at the local hospital. She was the kind of person who spoke loudly, kept everything in its place, and smiled at outsiders. But to me, inside the house, I felt like a mere detail in the scenery. Shortly after the wedding, Josh, my half-brother, was born. He was the center of attention from day one. I remember the new crib, the clothes bought at the most expensive store downtown, the toys I never had. Josh grew up surrounded by everything I dreamed of, and each Christmas felt like a reminder of how special he was to the family. His gifts were always wrapped in shiny paper with a blue or red bow. Mine came in grocery bags, if they came at all. When it rained heavily in Dayton, the attic where I slept would leak in 3 different spots. My mattress sat on 2 wooden pallets, and I had to change the sheets almost weekly to avoid the stench. It wasn't uncommon to wake up in the night to the sound of rain pounding on the old roof. I packed my things in a small suitcase because I knew I'd have to move everything at any moment. I had an old closet where I kept the few clothes that were mine alone. The rest were Josh's leftovers, always 2 sizes too big or too small, never the right size. My birthdays went by almost unnoticed. At most, I'd get a cake bought at the local market, the same cream cake with thin frosting that I'd come to save money. No one took a picture of me on those days, nor did they sing happy birthday properly. It was just another day in the household routine. David made a point of reminding me that money was counted. You should be thankful for food on the table, he'd say, while Josh would get a new bike or a state-of-the-art video game console. Linda was even more direct. She liked order and hated clutter, so I learned early on not to leave anything out of place. If I left a pair of sneakers in the living room, I knew I'd hear about it. I was never asked to help put up the Christmas tree or choose the color of the yard lights. Those tasks were reserved for Josh. He didn't seem to even realize I existed, but maybe he was just too young to understand. The few times I had the courage to talk about how I felt, I was told I was overreacting, that I was too sensitive, or that I needed to learn to be more grateful. I grew up thinking my presence was something to be tolerated, not celebrated. At school, I avoided bringing classmates home. I made excuses, saying I had a dentist appointment, or that I needed to study for a test, anything that would keep me from showing anyone what my life was really like. I remember looking out the attic window on cold nights, watching the smoke billow from the neighboring houses as I counted the broken tiles on the roof. The feeling of not belonging was constant. Sometimes my hand would sweat from clutching the blanket when I heard footsteps in the hallway, thinking I'd done something wrong. It wasn't fear. It was that certainty that at any moment someone would remember I was taking up space there. I went through each stage of childhood and adolescence knowing that, inside, I was seen as an obligation, not as part of the family. And even without understanding everything, I knew from an early age that the house on Miller Street was never truly my home. But that was just the beginning of the nightmare. We haven't yet discussed the chaos and tragedy, but it all began there, in the silent routine, in the quiet Christmases, in the days when being ignored hurt more than any punishment. And now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever felt like the place that should have been your refuge ended up becoming a minefield of exclusion? Tell me in the comments the moment you realized you weren't a priority in your own home, right below. I want to see who would actually have the courage to face that feeling head on. But what happened next was much worse. The first thing I felt when I stepped onto the sidewalk of my father's new house on that December 24th, 2022, was the wind biting my face. The neighborhood was unlike anything I'd ever known in Dayton. Well-kept streets, tree-lined streets, every house lit up with Christmas lights that looked like something out of a movie. I'd just finished my shift as a cashier at Redland Supermarket, and I headed straight there, clutching a hastily wrapped present with leftover paper from the previous year. My bus stopped 3 blocks away, and I had to cross a busy street with my hands stuffed in my coat pockets, trying not to let the wind steal what little warmth I had. When I arrived at the door of number 109 Maple Drive, I was met with a new red rug, the kind that says "Welcome" in gold letters. I rang the doorbell and counted to 10 before hearing quick footsteps in the hallway. Linda opened the door smiling, wearing a dark blue dress, impeccable makeup, and a pair of gold earrings she only took out of her jewelry box on special occasions. The smell of roast beef mixed with cinnamon wafted from the kitchen, reminding me I hadn't had a proper lunch. She hugged me quickly, almost out of obligation, and asked me to take off my shoes before entering so as not to dirty the new rug. I walked through the living room and saw Josh, now 17, sitting on the couch, laughing loudly at something on his phone. He was wearing a new shirt and clean white sneakers, the kind of expensive ones I knew where they came from, because there was always a bag of those left by his bedroom door. David appeared soon after, wearing a dress shirt and a wristwatch I'd never seen before. He greeted me with a cold handshake, the kind that seems to be just for politeness. My hand felt sweaty immediately, but I held on, feigning habit. I looked around the room and noticed the details. The Christmas tree was gigantic, filled with new ornaments, and the floor was clean, shining like I'd never seen it before. The dining table was already set. 6 places, folded napkins, white plates that hadn't been used on any occasion. In the center, an arrangement of red flowers. Everything seemed perfect, except for what I didn't see. Something was missing that reminded me of my existence. No photos of me on the shelves. On the bookshelf, several photos of Josh as a child, smiling, in his school uniform, dressed as a superhero at old parties. On top of the piano, a framed photo of David, Linda, and Josh on a trip to New York. Even their son, Cooper, was in 2 photos. I ran my hand along the side table looking for some souvenir of myself, but only found a Disney keychain Josh brought from his graduation trip. There was no sign of me. I left the gift near the tree, trying to hide my discomfort. Linda saw it and quickly tucked it away, behind the other large packages, almost invisible. As I walked around the living room, I noticed the pictures were all new, not the old ones from the house on Miller Street. In the hallway, Josh's school awards were lined up with little gold plaques, each with his name right in the center. My stomach lurched, but I tried to maintain my composure, sitting in the corner of the sofa. I listened to the 3 of them chatting, as if I were watching a show on TV. They laughed, talked about the swimming competition, the new neighbors, and their plans for their next trip in June of the following year. My name wasn't mentioned once. In the kitchen, Linda called me to help with the turkey. I tried to join in, but she already had everything under control. She handed me a knife to cut the potatoes, but quickly took it away, saying I could sit down, that everything was almost ready. I stood there, listening to the clanging of cutlery, and thinking that even the sound of the pans was different in this new house. It seemed like everything had its place. Each person, too, except me. At one point I heard the house phone ring. Linda answered and walked down the hallway, talking quietly. I saw through the living room window that it was starting to snow. Cars passed slowly. Some neighbors took pictures on the sidewalk. I found myself wondering where my things were at that moment. The small suitcase I'd brought from my old house was still leaning against my apartment, on top of the wardrobe, ready to be used again if needed. When dinner time arrived, everyone sat down at the table. David made a point of pouring wine for Linda, then Josh, and finally me. He commented that the new house had been a big step for the family, that it was the beginning of a new phase for all of us. I looked at the 3 of them, saw the sparkle in their eyes, and felt as if I were visiting the life of someone other than myself. That night was just beginning, and as much as everything seemed beautiful on the outside, something told me it wasn't for nothing that they insisted I be there. I thought I knew what fear was, until that day. No one forgets what they feel in a place where they're invisible. Stories like these need to be heard. Like and subscribe now, because what comes after that panel will knock your socks off. The smell of roast beef still hung in the air when I heard the gate open. I looked out the window and saw Grandpa Will slowly getting out of his silver Honda, wearing that brown overcoat he'd become a trademark every December. He carried a box of presents under his arm and stared at the front of the house, with an expression of someone still unsure whether to approve of the choice. David met him at the door, smiling and beckoning him inside. Linda was already setting the table, while Josh dropped his phone and ran to hug him, as if he hadn't seen his grandfather in months, even though he'd only been there 3 weeks before. I stood by the couch, waiting for the right moment to approach. When Will walked in, he made a point of greeting me with a tight hug and asking about my job at the supermarket. He had that direct way about him, asking questions directly, truly paying attention to my answers. Before I could sit back down, Linda announced excitedly, "Let's take the family photos before dinner." No one protested. I saw David straightening his shirt collar, Josh quickly brushing his hair in front of the hallway mirror, and Linda arranging everyone in front of the Christmas tree. She made a point of placing me next to Grandpa, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. But I knew, deep down, something was wrong. It was strange to realize how quickly they wanted to capture that moment. Linda arranged every detail, checked each person's position, asked me to move closer to the center. "Smile more, Ethan. Lean a little against Josh. Grandpa Will, put your hand on his shoulder." I obeyed, but my face felt stiff, unable to force a real smile. David went to the bookshelf, grabbed a brand new digital camera, one of those with a wide lens that records up to 8K resolution, and took at least 15 photos from different angles. They switched places 3 times to ensure no one was left out. It was the first time in 23 years that I had been asked to appear in so many photos alongside the family. As much as the camera clicks sounded like a celebration, only I could tell it wasn't a celebration. It was a strategy. After the photos in front of the tree, Linda suggested everyone go outside. The ground was slippery from the light snow, and she nearly fell running to fix everyone's red coats and hats. This time, she made a point of giving me a blue scarf. "It matches your skin tone," she said, trying to sound kind. Grandpa Will stood between me and Josh, smiling genuinely into the camera, as if unaware of how rehearsed it was. I saw Linda watching me out of the corner of her eye, as if checking to see if my posture was correct, if my smile was convincing, if Grandpa was buying the act. With each flash, I felt my hand grow colder beneath the glove, and my mouth felt dry as if I'd gone all day without water. It wasn't just discomfort. It was a feeling that I was participating in something staged, just to impress those who had never been inside the house. After the photos, Linda asked Josh to get the instant camera, one of those that prints on the spot, saying her grandfather liked analog photos. David stuck 2 of them in a silver frame and handed it to Will along with a, "See, Dad? Now you'll have a whole family photo in the new house." Grandpa smiled, complimented the gift, and ran his finger along the glass as if to preserve that moment. If anyone there truly believed the scene, it wasn't me. I could only think about how many times I'd been ignored on other Christmases, how many parties had been thrown without inviting me, how many fake smiles I'd had to swallow since I understood how the house priorities worked. That was the first photo with everyone together, and it was no coincidence. I looked at Linda and saw the relief on her face when she realized her grandfather was satisfied. It was as if she'd accomplished a mission, and now she could relax until the end of the night. The food arrived soon after, but the feeling of being part of a play wouldn't leave my mind. I chewed slowly, responded when spoken to, feigned interest in Josh's stories about his new school, but all I could think about were those photos. Every smile, every pose, every comment about how close the family was seemed scripted, and deep down, it was impossible not to feel like it all had a greater purpose, a purpose that, until that moment, I could only guess at. I thought the worst was over. I was wrong. While the smell of dinner still filled the room, and the voices feigned lightness, my head filled with memories that seemed to stick to my bones. At home, birthdays were always just another day. When I was 9, I received a blue baseball cap with a faded brim that had previously belonged to my father. Another year, I received a jigsaw puzzle missing 2 pieces. These recycled gifts were the norm. If I asked why Josh got new cars, I heard that his age was different, he needed stimulation. My achievements became a footnote in the family routine. The report card with 5 perfect scores was forgotten in the drawer, and the silver medal from the science championship never left the bottom of the backpack. Josh's honorable mentions for trivial things always found pride of place on the bookshelf and were celebrated with pizza and even fireworks in the garage. It seemed that, to them, I was the extra, the accumulation, something that simply needed to stay out of the way. Linda was always full of comments like, "You should give your brother more space to study," always placing the burden of organizing the house on my shoulders. I often heard from her bedroom door that I took up too much space, that if I had fewer books, there would be room for Josh's trophies. As I grew older and realized I couldn't expect recognition, I tried to create my own rituals. At 14, I saved 3 months' worth of lemonade sales on the street corner to buy a skateboard. The day I brought it home, I heard David say it was dangerous and that I was wasting my time. The skateboard ended up on top of the closet, where it gathered dust until I gave up using it. At school, I only drew attention when I forgot an assignment or arrived late. I had no one to sign the notices from the principal. I learned to handle everything on my own. When I turned 18, I went into my father's room to talk about college. I showed him the Ohio State University brochures, explained that I needed support with my application, and told him about my plans to study engineering. David interrupted me before I could finish, saying, "Josh needs peace and quiet to study. You should already be thinking about leaving. He's a priority now." That didn't sound like a surprise. It confirmed everything I'd realized in previous years. My mouth went dry, but all I could do was ask if he really thought it was time for me to look elsewhere. He replied, looking out the window, "The house is full. It's best for everyone." The next day, with 4 cardboard boxes and my blue suitcase, I left the house on Miller Street and moved into a small apartment on Meadow Avenue. I paid the first $380 of rent with money I saved from the supermarket, where I'd started as a bagger before I even graduated from high school. The apartment was so old that the heater kept going out in the winter, the windows stuck, and the parquet floor chipped away at my feet. I scrambled to buy a used table from Facebook, found a crooked chair on the sidewalk, and hung a makeshift coat rack behind the door. I learned to cook rice in a second-hand microwave and fix the sink valve with duct tape because no one would come to fix it for me. Some months I only had money for ramen noodles, but I never asked for help. When I got my first promotion to cashier, I didn't even mention it to my family. I climbed the ladder slowly, each raise an extra $2 a week. Nothing life-changing, but enough to keep me paying my bills on time. Meanwhile, Josh continued to be a star. His victories were posted on the family's social media, always accompanied by praise from Linda, videos of David applauding from the stands, and messages from neighbors telling me he was the pride of the street. I watched it on my phone, lying on the air mattress, trying not to feel envious. It seemed like no matter what I tried, I would never reach that level. One December night, I opened the building's mailbox and found a Christmas card of the 3 of them smiling in front of the fireplace in their new house. No mention of my name, no message saying they missed me. I tore up the envelope and threw it away before going upstairs. This only reinforced what I already knew. My presence was never a priority, and every achievement of mine, no matter how small, would always be ignored. But I was far from imagining what they would still do to keep everything the way they always wanted. I never got used to Linda calling. Usually she'd text me or ask Josh to let me know if there was an important event. Events that almost always happened without me. So when the phone rang one Tuesday night and I saw her name on the screen, it took me a few seconds to decide whether to answer. The clock read 8:10 p.m., and it was freezing cold in Dayton, and I was trying to finish a frozen lasagna, the kind that costs less than $3 at the grocery store. I answered with the television playing in the background, just to avoid sounding like I was expecting something important. Linda was direct. He spoke quickly, as if reading from a text. He said they were organizing a small party to mark Christmas, and that they really wanted me to come. He repeated the new address 3 times, 1432 Hollow Creek, as if trying to convince herself it made sense. I didn't know whether to say yes immediately or ask her to think about it. I could only say, "Okay, I'll go," and jotted down the address on a crumpled note, already anticipating that the invitation had more to do with protocol than with any real desire to see me. The day before, I stopped at Dollar General after work and bought a simple picture frame. I paid $2.40, chose discreet packaging, and enclosed a photo of myself and my mother, Laura, which I'd kept for years in a small cardboard box. It was a symbolic gift, but one of enormous value to me. Perhaps subconsciously, I wanted to remind them that, no matter how hard they tried to erase it, that history still existed. I caught the bus at 6:20 on Saturday, endured a 20-minute wait in a freezing cold zone, and walked another 4 blocks until I reached Hollow Creek. Every house on the street had a tree shining on the porch and colorful ornaments swaying in the breeze. When I rang the doorbell, Josh answered. He didn't even look up from his phone as he said, "Hi, Ethan." As soon as he finished, he walked inside. I entered slowly, trying not to make any noise with my damp boots on the hardwood floor. In the hallway, I saw the same new paintings and furniture lined up. Linda appeared with a hurried smile, took my gift, thanked me without looking at it, and placed the package behind larger ones, almost hidden. David only looked up from his newspaper to say hello, saying dinner was almost ready. I tried to blend in, but it soon became clear that the environment wasn't for me. Josh chatted animatedly with a distant cousin about video games. Linda set the table with triangle-folded napkins, and David cut meat in the kitchen, talking loudly about the price of turkey at the supermarket. I sat on the edge of the couch and watched the twinkling lights on the tree. It was as if my presence was just another item on that night's to-do list. During the party, I noticed everyone had gifts for everyone except me. When someone asked where I was from, Linda would reply, "He's living near downtown, working," without elaborating, as if each piece of information were a secret that needed to be hidden. I watched the photos being taken, always with the trio together, always with Josh in the middle, and not once did anyone ask me to be photographed. When I approached the table to try the rice, Linda was already clearing away the dishes, rushing to clean up. At one point, I sat near the living room window, watching the cars pass by. The muffled sound of voices coming from the hallway, laughter, and side conversations all gave the impression that I was just a casual visitor, not a part of it. When I tried to look for any belongings of mine scattered around the house, I found nothing. No old coat, no forgotten book, not a single memento that would prove I'd once belonged to their house. Everything there was new, shiny, and perfectly arranged. Even the pillows matched the rug. It didn't take me more than 15 minutes to feel like the invitation was just another formality, a step to complete before the next performance. And worst of all, I could tell, from the looks on their faces, that they were trying so hard to act as if this were natural. Dinner was served quickly. No one asked my opinion on the menu. No one commented on the gift I'd brought. I was the last to finish dessert, and when I got up to help clear the plates, Linda had already dragged the dishes to the sink. Deep down, what hurt wasn't the coldness, but the realization that, even with all the years living under the same roof, my presence was just another obligation to fulfill. That night, the house at number 1432 Hollow Creek felt even further from the idea of home than any other I'd ever lived in. But as I stared at my distorted reflection in the window, something about that rehearsed routine began to bother me in a different way. I didn't know it yet, but that feeling was a harbinger of what was about to happen. The clatter of silverware and conversations quieted down when Grandpa Will entered the room, nearing the end of dinner. He was always late, but he was the kind of guy no one dared complain about, because when he showed up, everyone knew the evening was changing. This time, he took off his brown overcoat, hung it on the coat rack in the entryway, and came straight to the table, carrying a rectangular box wrapped in blue wrapping paper. He greeted each grandchild one by one, hugging them tightly, letting his gray beard mark each grandchild's face. When he reached me, he squeezed my shoulder with both hands, staring at me as if checking if I really was the boy he saw in old photos. I sat next to him, feeling his hand still warm on my back, while Linda brought dessert, and Josh asked if there would be board games after dinner. The conversation revolved around jokes about the weather, comments about the new neighbors, and the inevitable school stories Josh made a point of telling out loud. I tried to pretend to pay attention, but I kept my eyes on the digital clock on the mantelpiece, noticing the minutes slowly tick by. My grandfather, as always, took a generous slice of apple pie, took 2 bites, and then suddenly stopped chewing. He looked at me, and in that instant, it was as if the entire house had been turned off. He leaned back in his chair, smiled broadly, and asked, loudly and directly, "Ethan, do you like the new house I bought you?" Linda's fork stopped halfway to the plate. David's wine glass hovered in the air, never reaching his lips. Josh looked first at his father, then at me, trying to figure out if this was a joke or a test. My stomach tightened, but I managed only a, "What do you mean, Grandpa?" reply. The silence grew so thick, I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Will leaned his arms on the table, adjusted his wristwatch, that old Timex with the scratched band, and began to explain that he had sent money to David and Linda, specifying everything, every detail, to ensure the new house would be mine. I sent the full amount in 3 transfers. I wrote down the name of the bank, the dates. "You were supposed to start a new phase here, Ethan," he said, without raising his voice, but looking firmly at my father. It was at that moment that David's hand began to tremble, and Linda turned pale. She tried to interrupt, saying that everything was done for the family's benefit, but Grandpa Will cut in immediately. I requested the receipts, checked the registry office. Everything was in Ethan's name. "Where are the papers?" The mood changed so quickly that the room seemed to cool, even with the heater on full blast. I felt exposed there, as if every glance expected a reaction from me, some kind of explanation, but all I could do was clench my fingers together under the table, feeling my skin grow damp with cold sweat. David then cleared his throat and said that there was a mix-up, that the money was used to settle family matters, that the paperwork needed to be redone. Grandpa didn't even blink. He said again, in the same calm tone, that such a coincidence wasn't possible, that he wanted to see the original contract, the transfer receipts, the bank statements. Linda no longer knew where to look, and Josh shrank back in his chair, embarrassed. I could feel my face heating up, unsure whether to respond or wait for some reaction from the rest of the table. With each word my grandfather said, the masks slowly slipped, and the feeling was that everything that had been so carefully assembled was falling apart, piece by piece, right there, in front of everyone. My grandfather turned to me, lowered his voice slightly, and said, "It was meant to be yours, Ethan. From the beginning." David tried to change the subject, saying that life hadn't been easy, that bills were piling up, that family is priority. But Grandpa Will cut in again, asking how such a large gift could simply disappear without anyone knowing. No one answered. The silence lasted for what seemed like an eternity, until Linda ran off to get a folder of documents, slamming the hallway door. When she returned, she was carrying loose sheets of paper, old contracts, papers with half-stamped papers. Will took each sheet, analyzed it, asked questions, and with each evasive answer, the tension only grew. I felt neither anger nor relief. It was a mixture of shame and disbelief. The house where we sat wasn't mine, never had been. It was all a facade. My name had been used to secure the money, but I was just a supporting character in their story. Grandfather's gaze was heavy, but this time, not to demand anything of me. It was as if he was saying, "I knew it," as if, deep down, he'd come here to see for himself what he'd long suspected. David stammered one last time, but Will stood and shushed me, gripping my hand tightly. I couldn't remember ever feeling so much pressure in a confined space. My mouth went dry, the food felt like a stone in my stomach, and the night lost any Christmas color. There, in the middle of the room, the entire theater collapsed, and there was no turning back. I thought the worst was over. I was wrong. My head spun as Grandpa Will's words seemed to echo louder than any other conversation that night. I couldn't quite process what was happening, each new detail adding to the weight of years of exclusion. Will took a deep breath, and for the first time, I saw the old man lose his patience. He didn't need to raise his voice. He simply stood, rested both hands on the table, looked each of them in the eye, and began to count. For 6 years since 2016, I've sent regular deposits. The total, David, is over $400,000. I wrote everything down. Dates, amounts, copies of receipts. It was for Ethan to study, to have his own home, to secure his future. You promised me, David. You guaranteed it to me. No one at the table dared to face their grandfather head on. Linda shuffled through the papers, flipping through pages that didn't match, and Josh stared down, motionless, seemingly understanding for the first time that the family history wasn't as clean as he'd always thought. David, his voice low, tried to find excuses. He talked about old debts, necessary renovations, difficulties that never included me in the conversations. But his grandfather cut him off, bluntly telling him the truth. I asked a friend to investigate. I found out everything today. The deed is in your name and Linda's. There's no document in Ethan's name. You even falsified the bank documents. In that instant, I understood that the photos taken in front of the Christmas tree, the forced laughter, and the hasty invitation weren't for me. It was all part of a poorly staged act designed to keep Will believing the lie they'd been maintaining for years. My name served only to complete the picture of the perfect family. The photos of everyone together, the silver frames, every rehearsed pose, everything designed to create the illusion that I was part of it. Inside, I felt my blood rising slowly, but my reaction was different. I shrank back in my chair, trying to contain the impact of the revelation. Will got straight to the point, showing me the transfer statements, handwritten on a yellow legal pad. Look, Ethan, here, $30,000 in January of 2017, then $50,000 in March, then another $80,000 in June of 2018. There were 21 transfers, some larger, some smaller, but always marked Ethan's fund, Ethan's education, Ethan's house. I trusted them. He tossed the pad on the table. No one touched it. My stomach churned. I tried to recall any gesture from my father, any sign that he was saving money for me, any talk about college or future plans. Nothing came. On the contrary, my every request, every attempt to reach out, had been met with apologies or silence. Linda was now pretending to search her briefcase for new papers, but Will was no longer having any of it. You've spent every penny on this house, the cars, the trips, the imported furniture. There's nothing left for Ethan, not even a decent explanation. The silence stretched on, broken only by the sound of the digital clock striking 8:25. No one knew where to put their hands. I felt my breath short, my face hot, but I still couldn't react the way I imagined. I just stared at Will, waiting to understand what would come next, as if a final card might be turned on the table. David, his voice breaking, risked an apology. It was a difficult time, Dad. Things got out of hand. His grandfather didn't accept it. You stole from your own son, from me too, and you lied to me all these years. Josh tried to interrupt, saying he knew nothing, but Will ignored him, focusing on the adults. The old man, for the first time, looked more sad than angry. You were always here, Ethan. I did everything to make sure you didn't want for anything. And yet, you got the leftovers. Linda didn't answer, just gathered her papers and went to the kitchen, hiding behind the door. The weight of that truth fell on my shoulders in a way that was hard to explain. I started to piece together old scenes, every forgotten birthday, every excuse about being short on cash, every time I'd been left out of decisions. I realized that my entire adult life had been shaped by a family fraud. The money that could have changed my future served only to guarantee the comfort of those who had always ignored me. The worst part wasn't even the financial betrayal. It was discovering that I existed only to fill a role in a happy family play. Old Will sat back down, put down the papers, took my hand, and said softly, "This ends today. Now, you come with me." The rest of the table remained silent, David staring into space. Linda disappeared into the kitchen, Josh unable to lift his face. There, at that dinner that was supposed to be just another Christmas, everything fell apart, and nothing would ever be the same again. I left that house before sunrise. It was still dark when I threw my things into an old backpack, grabbed my heavy coat, and went to the sidewalk to wait for Grandpa Will. He arrived in the same silver Honda, glanced at me quickly in the rearview mirror, and told me to get in. No one came out to say goodbye. I didn't hear a door slam, nor did anyone call my name. As the car drove through the quiet streets of Dayton, I realized I was leaving behind more than just walls and furniture. It was as if a part of my history was standing at the gate, watching, unable to say anything. The trip to Chicago took 4.5 hours. We drove for the most part in silence, the radio playing softly old songs I'd never even heard the names of. Every now and then, Will would strike up a conversation. He'd ask about my job at the supermarket, my favorite subjects in high school, My few memories of my mother. He'd talk about the time Laura dreamed of seeing Lake Michigan, as if trying to weave memories between generations to create bonds that had been denied for so long. I answered slowly, a little suspiciously, but with each conversation I felt the mood shift. It was strange, after so many years of being treated like an outsider, to find space even for comfortable silences. We arrived in the Lincoln Park neighborhood shortly after 10 in the morning. The building where Will lived was old on the outside, with red brick and a stone staircase, but inside, everything was well kept. The smell of fresh coffee in the reception area, family portraits on the walls. His apartment was on the 3rd floor. In the hallway, there was blue carpet, a dark wooden door, and the sound of neighbors chatting early in the morning. He opened the door, pointed to the room next to his and said, "This will be your place," with no deadline. I walked in and noticed the large window, the view of the dry winter trees, and a desk already set with a pad, pen, and lamp. On the dresser, a photo of my mother, Laura, smiling beside him, as if she were welcoming me in that simple way that only true family can do. Will wasted no time. Before lunch, he pulled out a binder filled with papers about universities, open enrollment, and scholarships. "I always wanted you to have what the rest of your family never gave you," he said, showing me brochures from Illinois Tech, the University of Chicago, and DePaul. He knew people in the field, friends from his days as a contractor. He called 2 colleagues before he'd even finished his coffee, scheduled interviews, asked me to sort through documents, and explained how letters of recommendation worked. He made sure to walk me through each step, taking his time, but without allowing me to hide behind fear. During my 2nd week in Chicago, I applied to the civil engineering school. I took the test, attended the interview, and underwent a profile assessment. Will waited at the corner diner while I filled out paperwork, saying he'd only leave with me by his side. When the positive response came, "Congratulations, Ethan. You've been accepted to the civil engineering program, starting in February 2023. I felt a strange relief, as if some of the weight of my old life had fallen to the floor of his office. Will smiled, hugged me, and said, "Now your life begins." Before classes started, he introduced me to the people at his construction company, a small but stable company in the western part of the city. I went to work as a warehouse assistant. There I learned about inventory management, organizing materials, and checking deliveries. At first I found it all complicated. I had to write down batch numbers and cement expiration dates, calibrate power tools, and use the computer control system, a software called Buildmaster, which I'd never seen before. I messed up a delivery twice and had to stay after work to fix it, but no one treated me like a problem. On the contrary, each colleague was patient enough to show me how it worked. These were simple things, but to me, they felt like real learning, without anyone throwing in my face that I was occupying the wrong space. The routine was demanding. I'd wake up at 6, take the Brown Line subway to work, and return at night to study. Will always left a plate of food ready for me in the fridge, and sometimes he'd wait for me to have dinner together, even late. Little by little, I began to feel at home. He liked to tell stories about his youth, about the construction projects he'd done in rural Chicago, about the times his mother, my great-grandmother, braved the Chicago cold to raise her children. He'd tell me how smart and determined Laura was, and how she dreamed of being an engineer. "She'd be proud to see you here," he'd repeat whenever I thought about giving up. I started going for walks in Grant Park on Saturdays, visiting the public library, exploring new streets. No one asked me to smile for photos. No one feigned interest to put on a front. I was just Ethan, and that was finally enough. For the first time, I realized there was life beyond the old pain, but not everything was resolved overnight. Deep down, a part of me still waited for the next blow, as if getting used to affection would risk another setback. Still, I kept going, building what I could each day, because it was just the beginning of what I could be. The weeks in Chicago turned into months, and everything changed faster than I imagined. I was learning to take care of my own life, dividing my time between my job at the construction company, college, heart-to-heart conversations with Will, and small routines that had never been mine until then. Shopping for groceries, paying my cell phone bills, riding the crowded subway, and feeling the city truly engulf me. It wasn't long before news about David and Linda started trickling in. First came a short message from Josh, saying his father was going through a difficult time. I read it, put it off until later, and continued my routine because, for the first time, I felt like my time was my own. It was Will who broke the news about 3 weeks later, over chili at the restaurant near the office. "Your dad lost his job at Allied Solutions, that company he worked for over 15 years. They cut the department, laid off a bunch of people, but he couldn't find any new positions," Will said, fiddling with his phone. I just shook my head, unsure what to say. Deep down, it wasn't surprising. I'd often seen David belittle those struggling, always saying they just had to get on with it, or try harder. When his turn came, no one held his hand. Linda tried to get a job as an assistant at local clinics, but she never really stuck. People said she couldn't work well with teams or couldn't take orders. Their salaries vanished along with their standard of living. Josh, accustomed to never hearing no at home, tried college in Michigan, dropping out in the second semester, saying he didn't connect with the program. He worked as a waiter, quitting 2 weeks later because he complained about his boss. He tried selling insurance over the phone, but quit before his first paycheck. Little by little, they sold the furniture, then the new car David loved to show off at family gatherings, then the household electronics. In May of that year, the news arrived by text message. The Hollow Creek house had been auctioned. An unpaid mortgage, overdue electric and gas bills, all piling up until there was no other option. They rented a small apartment on the north side of Dayton, an old building with jammed windows and stained carpet. It was the same kind of place I'd been told years before I should consider myself lucky to live in. I felt a mixture of relief and estrangement. It wasn't a pleasure to see the family's downfall, but neither did I feel any obligation to try to salvage what they'd destroyed. It was around this time that the calls started. First, a call from David. I didn't answer. Then messages from Linda asking for just some help to start over, saying I was in better shape now, and that family was something to lean on. I listened to each message and deleted them all. It wasn't resentment. It was the realization that helping at that moment would be repeating everything they'd done to me, covering up a hole and pretending nothing had happened. I sent a single reply to Josh. "Everything you ever had was denied to me. Now, you need to learn what it's like to do it on your own." He didn't respond. Will watched from afar, always respecting my silence. Sometimes he'd look at me over his glasses and say, "Sometimes justice doesn't need our hand." He knew it wasn't revenge, but a kind of natural adjustment. The curious thing was seeing how, without me making a move, everything realigned itself. The same people who taught me to live with what was left were now experiencing firsthand what they'd never believed possible. I continued my routine, college progressing, new friendships emerging, the responsibilities of my internship increasing. At the end of the semester, Josh texted me again, asking if I could lend him money to pay for a short course. I simply replied, "Learn to walk on your own like I did." I didn't hear anything from them after that. Whether they felt anger, shame, or regret, I never knew. My phone was free of that burden, and each ignored call felt like a kind of liberation. Deep down, I knew it wasn't my job to fix what they themselves had destroyed. Will's apartment grew cozier. We decorated a wall together with photos of Chicago. He liked to joke that the family was now just the two of us, and that everything that would come from then on depended on the choices I made. It was the first time in 24 years that I didn't carry the fear of losing everything at any moment. I discovered that sometimes justice arrives without us having to do anything. And strange as it may seem, it was only then that I realized how quiet peace can be when we allow ourselves to truly live. But even after everything, life still held one last surprise. Time passed quickly after that first year in Chicago. The seasons changed several times, and each new cycle brought a kind of freedom I'd never experienced before. I formed a routine that blended responsibility and pleasure. College in the morning, an internship at Will's construction company in the afternoon, coffee with friends at the end of the day, and weekend walks through Lincoln Park, just to look at the city and realize that it was all now real. Sometimes Will would wait for me on the building's balcony, always with 2 hot coffees in hand, telling me a story about his family, or asking about my plans for the future. In those moments, I realized that peace didn't come from money or status, but from the simple fact of being surrounded by people who truly care. 2 years had passed since that Christmas Eve in Dayton when, on a cloudy Friday in October, the building's intercom rang early in the morning. I answered it expecting a delivery, but it was Josh. He'd come by bus from across the state. He walked up with his head down, his torn backpack slung over his shoulder, wearing old sneakers that had once been white. He stopped at the apartment door, and for the first time, he looked different, tired, lacking that glow of someone who always had it easy. He sat on the couch, looked at the photos on the wall, and began to tell me about his life, the struggle to find a job, the college he'd been put off from, the small apartment he'd lived in with David and Linda. He didn't apologize or try to justify himself. He just said he needed a place to start over. I sat in silence for a while, taking my time listening. It was strange to see the brother who, for so many years, had symbolized everything I'd missed, now asking for the basics, a chance. I could have retaliated, thrown the whole past in his face, but I no longer felt like rehashing that story. I just said what needed to be said. Josh, you need to learn to earn your way through things. No one did it for me, and that's how we grow. He lowered his head, stood there for a few more minutes, then thanked me and left without drama, without promises. When the door closed, I felt a sense of relief. It wasn't revenge, it was just the end of a cycle. I moved on without looking back. With my civil engineering degree in hand, I landed my first official job at a large urban design firm in Chicago. Will was present at the ceremony, clapping and smiling brightly. I began visiting museums, exploring new neighborhoods, and traveling whenever I had time off. The friends I made became part of my chosen family, people with whom I shared my achievements, doubts, and even some hardships. Little by little, I stopped counting the days waiting for my biological family to accept me. I no longer carry the burden of ignored birthdays, recycled gifts, or painful silences. What remains is gratitude. Gratitude for having survived what seemed impossible, for having found someone like Will, for having built everything without having to step on anyone. I understood that justice has strange ways of arriving, that often the best thing we can do is get out of the way and allow life to put each person in their place. I don't hold any anger toward David, Linda, or Josh. Those are their choices. What matters now is what I do with mine. Today, I look forward, not back. I work with what I love. I study whenever I can. I help those who truly want to grow alongside me. I've built real bonds, without having to feign joy for photos, without having to fit into a made-up theater. Do I miss anything? Sometimes I think about how different things would have been if my mother were here, but I've learned to remember her with affection, not pain. And when the past threatens to resurface, I take a deep breath, look at everything I've achieved, and move forward. Because after all, I've finally found my place in the world, and there's no better feeling than knowing that place was earned with truth, respect, and gratitude. Choosing to move forward, leaving behind what no longer serves you, and rebuilding every piece of yourself isn't for everyone. Only those who have felt the door close behind them understand the weight and freedom of this new beginning. And you've just walked through this story with me. You've felt the impact of injustice firsthand, seen firsthand how dignity is stolen in silence, and realized what happens when someone chooses not to bow to what the world expects, but to forge their own path, the hard way, one step at a time. Now, there's no turning back. There are no more excuses. What you do from here on out is also part of my story. Comment here now. My place is where I'm respected. I want to see who has the courage to say this out loud, to assert without fear that they truly deserve a place, even if they've never been given permission. I want to read every comment, know how this story affected you, understand what you would do with everything in your hands, or with nothing, as it was for me. Share in the comments the moment you realized you, too, needed to choose your own path. You're already part of this story just by coming this far. I know this story has impacted you, that it shook every truth you believed about family, justice, and starting over. Stories like this don't go unnoticed. They don't disappear from our minds when the video ends. So, leave your like now. It shows that stories that expose the truth can't be buried. And subscribe to the channel. Here, each story transforms, challenges, and shakes your thinking about courage, abandonment, and redemption. Every time you click subscribe, more people find the strength to rewrite their own destiny. It's not just another video. It's a call to action for those who won't settle for less than they deserve. Keep following these real stories that challenge the limits of what's bearable. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and be part of this community that doesn't close its eyes to the truth. Here, you'll always find a place, a voice, and someone willing to tell what's never been said before. Stories like these need to be heard, shared, and felt until the very last word. Don't just watch. Participate, get involved, become an active part of those who transform their own destiny and don't accept crumbs. Now don't waste time. What happened here was just the beginning. The next video is already on screen, ready to challenge everything you think about survival, forgiveness, and the limits of the impossible. Click now, because those who made it this far deserve to know what comes next. And believe me, what's about to happen could change your understanding of justice forever.